The wind stung with the foretelling of winter, and leaves spiraled down from the trees in a whirlwind of crimson, amber, and gold. His stride quickened, anxiety biting at his heels, an unseen foe pursuing his thoughts, if not himself. Perhaps the threat was imagined, perhaps it was tangible. The forest pressed in around him, branches encroaching in on the thin pathway, grabbing at his shoulders, pulling on his arms. He had seen her convulsive turning, heard the rhythm of her percussive chanting. Worse yet, he heard the voice answer her from the fire. In fear, he backed away from the warped glass of the window. Clumsy footfalls toppled a pile of firewood, his illicit snooping discovered. The right halted in its tracks as she met his gaze. The path was barely discernible from the overbearing wilderness, and before long he was truly lost. His panic escalated to terror as the sun stooped low in the sky, its radiance now matching the descending flora that pooled on the forest floor, concealed tangled roots that seemed to conspire against his graceless steps. After stumbling blindly through the woods for what felt like hours, he started to hear the echoing shouts pierce through the crisp foliage. Torchlight began to break through the dense woods, casting fractured shadows, his salvation calling to him in the dark. Every able-bodied adult from the small, isolated hamlet was calling his name, their panic only surpassed by his own. Before he could reach the town, he fell into the strong but dispassionate arms of one Nehemiah Burrows. He was panting, covered in scratches, his coat and pants torn. He was swiftly brought to his father, who scooped him into his arms. They were soon surrounded by a crowd of curious onlookers.
"Ezra, speak, boy. What madness drove you into the woods, and what foolishness have you done?" "I went to fetch water for the goats, but I saw that woman in the woods. She was communing with spirits. They chased me through the forest. She's a witch, I swear it."
"This boy and his imagination," Nehemiah scoffed. Burrows was a blacksmith by trade. At 40 years, he still had the strength and tenacity of his youth, but had become the anchor of the fledgling community. The town looked to him for guidance, and to his wife, Grace, for comfort. "Joseph, you must get him in line. We cannot countenance these vain jaunts, not with winter approaching. Such distractions take us away from the necessary preparations and can only lead to someone getting hurt."
Nodding his regretful agreement, he turned his attention to Ezra. "Enough of these fanciful tales. We will not tolerate your besmirching of Edith Sinclair's good name just because you lost your way in the woods."
"But father—" His protest was cut short by a swift slap across the face. The sound cracked, the echo dissipating through the trees. At 11 years old, I shouldn't have to deal with such childish affairs. Joseph and Ezra returned to their plot of land at the edge of the hamlet. Ezra had always been a sensitive boy. Nary a night would pass that he wouldn't find his way to his father's bed, taking the place where his mother once laid, startled by a shrill wind whistling past his window, or a shadow cast by a branch swaying in the moonlight. The forest was deep, and their town, merely 40 souls, was the only approximation of civilization for miles. A wilderness outpost in a sea of twisted and gnarled trees. It was a cruel setting for a boy whose mind conjured shapes that took form in the darkness, who saw spirits lingering behind every trembling bough and phantoms in the rustling leaves. Yet he was sure of what he had seen, the flicker through that warped pane, the shifting of bodies in the half-light. Edith Sinclair moved in time with an unheard rhythm, her shadow bending and swaying in the glow. The flames seemed to answer her, curling close, then drawing back, twisting and dancing as they licked up the hearth. Another shape stirred beside her, or was it the smoke and vapour rising from the cauldron, gathering and parting at her touch? And the voice, a murmur rising from within, indistinct, yet heavy, like that of a man but deeper, roughened by the crackle of the blaze. The longer he turned it over in his mind, the more it slipped away, until only one certainty remained. He had seen something, though he could no longer say what. Joseph awoke the next morning to the chill creeping beneath the door of their single-room home. The hearth lay cold, ash piled in its centre. He shook Ezra awake.
"Oh boy, get the fire going. I must find the pail you lost last night."
Setting off towards the well, Joseph hoped he would not have to trudge through the woods all morning in search of the lost pail. Soon he realized he would need to retrace Ezra's steps, taking him past the cottage of Edith Sinclair. He thought it prudent to offer her an apology on behalf of his kin. Edith was of fair countenance, not yet 30, and beautiful in a quiet way. An apothecary by trade, she kept to herself, but offered a service the town sorely lacked. Many wondered why such a woman remained unmarried, and stranger still, that she chose this remote place to settle. Yet she was gracious, kind, and invariably helpful. Joseph rapped lightly at the door. Edith cracked it open, her usual shy demeanour in place. "Greetings, Edith. I wish to apologize for Ezra. The boy's curiosity and imagination lead him into trouble, yet know that we appreciate your patience and work here."
"It is no trouble. Boys will be boys." "Indeed, but he must learn to temper it, and soon."
"Enjoy these times while they last. One day you shall miss them, believe it or not." Joseph was struck by a measure of wisdom in her words that belied her youth.
"Thank you, Edith. Your grace is noted. God bless you. And you as well, Joseph."
When Joseph returned home, pail filled from the town well, the hearth was still cold. "That boy," he muttered, teeth clenched. Stepping onto the threshold, he called out into the crisp autumn morning, "Ezra!" His voice trembling, anger curling his lips. He searched the house, the yard, even the narrow lane beyond, but found neither trace nor sound of the boy. Swallowing his pride, he made his way to the empty smithy. The forge lay cold and silent, tools still upon the workbench. Joseph waited, uneasily shifting from foot to foot, listening to the quiet of the main thoroughfare. After several minutes, Nehemiah appeared, striding down the lane with measured purpose, shoulders squared against the autumn chill.
"Nehemiah, I cannot find Ezra," Joseph said, voice tight. "Surely something has befallen him. He would not wander off so soon after last night."
"Wouldn't he, Joseph?" Nehemiah replied, calm yet firm. "We cannot put aside our labours each day to drag him from the woods. He must find his own way back. If he is still gone by dusk, then perhaps a search will be warranted." Yospe's heart pounded with every step back home. When the sun sank low, his worry coiled into panic, tightening about his chest like iron. The search had ended around midnight, yet Joseph pressed on until the first light of morning. He wandered the woods until noon, until exhaustion laid him low, and he returned home to collapse upon the cold stone floor. The ache of not knowing pressed heavy against his chest, as though a stone had settled there. He awoke to the crackle of a fire in the hearth. Nehemiah sat near, watching silently over him. "Joseph, forgive my uncaring words of yesterday." Nehemiah said quietly. I had not realized the weight of the boy's absence.
I understand, Nehemiah. How could you? Thank you for tending the fire.
Of course. We shall send watchmen to the woods in rotation to scour it each day. Whatever you require, Grace and I will provide.
Thank you, Nehemiah.
Nehemiah rose and strode from the house, the autumn wind following him along the path. Days passed, weeks bled into one another. The gold and amber of the trees had given way to the sombre browns and chestnuts of late fall, leaves crisping underfoot. There was no closure for Joseph, only the oppressive sameness of waking each morning to an empty home. He tended his chores out of habit, unaware, or perhaps unwilling, to ask himself why he continued. During Ezra's absence, the town fell ill. Whispers of curses threaded through the streets. Rumors of plague spread like wildfire, and sermons of God's judgment rang from the pulpit. Soon, suspicion settled upon the well, thought to have turned malignant. Joseph, long since despairing of life and fearing no curse, for he considered himself marked already, volunteered to descend into its depths and discern whether the cause stemmed from the earth or beyond it. The well lay some 20 paces into the woods beyond the town, where the water table could be reached by hand. The bucket had been replaced with a plank, and Joseph lowered himself into the darkness. 30 feet down, he called for the descent to halt. Torch in hand, he examined the water, its glassy surface disturbed. Something floated there. He nudged it with his foot. The object turned. A waterlogged, half-decomposed face stared back. Though the features were scarcely recognizable, he knew it, the face of his own son, Ezra. Who else could it be? His sob echoed up the well, cleaving the hearts of all who heard it. What they had long suspected was confirmed without words. Ezra was dead. The boy's corpse was removed from the well, yet before it could even be buried, Joseph's mind was in turmoil. He replayed the day of Ezra's disappearance over and over, each memory twisting in his mind. Had the boy been right? Could Edith have been the cause of his death? A witch disposing of a witness to her depravity? No, he had spoken to her at the very hour of Ezra's vanishing, and Nehemiah. Why had he been absent from his forge that morning? The same man who had chided Ezra for keeping the town from its labours had himself been missing when duty called.
Anger and resentment coiled in his throat like iron. He resolved to confront Nehemiah. The forge lay cold again when he arrived, a silent witness to the smith's absence. Then Joseph's thoughts turned to Edith. He would go to her and demand the truth of what Ezra had seen that night.
He arrived at the cottage and struck the door with clenched fists. Stifled gasps came from within, sharp and trembling. Driven by a mixture of dread and compulsion, he crept around the corner and peered through the same window Ezra had glimpsed the night of his disappearance. What he saw struck him dumb. Edith Sinclair, bare and trembling, pressed against Nehemiah Burroughs, their bodies entwined in a private rhythm that chilled him to his core. The sight raised more questions than it answered, each one clawing at the edges of his reason. His gait faltered, then snapped to rigid motion. Without a word, he turned on his heels and marched back toward the town, ignoring Nehemiah's attempts to call after him, the image burning behind his eyes. He did not know what it meant, nor how it tied to the unraveling of his life, or if it did at all. But he knew. The town must know. Edith Sinclair was a woman of beauty and gentle demeanour, alluring in ways subtle and disarming. Yet Nehemiah Burroughs was a man of godly repute. His wife and children would be devastated, but the concealment of such truth would be no act of charity. The revelation would rock the town, already poised on the precipice of the encroaching winter. He strode into the square, Nehemiah at his heels, and called out with a voice sharpened by grief and fury, "I have seen Nehemiah Burroughs in the throes of passion with the strumpet Edith Sinclair." The town froze. A collective gasp swept through the square, punctuated by a sharp intake of breath here, a hurried clutch of a shawl there. The firelight from nearby hearths danced across their faces, painting them in sudden, fearful relief. Nehemiah stood, breathless, shoulders hunched, head bowed in shame. "Is it true, Nehemiah?" Grace asked, her voice trembling, the question snagging in her throat. He did not raise his eyes, his hands clenched at his sides. "It is true," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "Yet the boy was right. She is a witch. She has beguiled me. I stood outside myself as it transpired. She must be the author of the curse upon our town, the destroyer of that boy, by means earthly or by those of the devil." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some recoiled, some whispered prayers under trembling breaths. Joseph felt the weight of every gaze, the intensity of accusation and fear pressing upon him. And yet, amid the horror and outrage, a strange clarity settled in his chest. He felt as though the ground had opened beneath him. All his life, he and the town had mocked Ezra for his whimsical imagination. Yet could it be that it was not imagination, but intuition? Had the boy perceived what no one else could, that a malignant force had crept into their midst? That the woman who brewed tinctures and medicines had turned her craft to poison, twisting their minds and afflicting their bodies? She must have summoned a spirit to carry off his son, to silence the threat to her dominion. He plunged into the theory with a feverish certainty, ignoring the nagging facts that perhaps it was far simpler. Nehemiah Burroughs had yielded to temptation, had been discovered, and had silenced the witness to his lust. Yet such reasoning felt impossibly small, inadequate to the horror pressing upon his mind, for it carried with it the tinge of his own complicity in the mockery of his flesh and blood.
At last, Edith was dragged from her home and brought to the church, now transformed into a makeshift courtroom, its walls heavy with the scent of pine, soot, and rising fear.
The church had been cleared of its usual pews and benches, replaced with rough-hewn tables and chairs for the court. The flicker of torches cast long shadows across the log walls, turning each face into a mask of suspicion or dread. Smoke from smouldering pine filled the air, mingling with the damp scent of fear. Edith Sinclair was brought forward, her hands bound loosely, her face pale but resolute. Joseph sat at the edge of the gathered crowd, eyes fixed, chest tight. His grief and fury had warped into something colder, more precise, a conviction that justice must be served, that truth, however terrible, must be revealed.
Edith Sinclair, the preacher now serving as magistrate, intoned, voice echoing off the rafters, "You stand accused of witchcraft, of bewitching the townsfolk, and of bringing death upon our children. How do you plead?"
Edith lifted her chin, her voice calm, yet trembling. "I plead not guilty, sir. I have wronged none. God is witness to my innocence."
A murmur swept through the room, part disbelief, part rising fury. Eyes darted from Joseph to the preacher, from neighbor to neighbor. Some clutched their scarves to their mouths, others pressed hands to their hearts, as if the air itself were laden with malevolence.
Joseph rose, voice sharp and unwavering. She danced in the firelight, whispered incantations, called upon spirits to do her bidding. My son saw it, he saw her, and he died for it. The crowd recoiled, whispering prayers, trembling. A few gawked, eyes wide, with a mixture of awe and horror. Edith's gaze did not waver. "I have done nothing. You accuse me of the death of a child I have never touched, never harmed. I spoke with you that very morning, Josper. If my God allows, let truth speak for itself." Joseph remained standing, finger jabbing as he leaned forward. "You said it yourself. You told me to enjoy the time I had with him, that one day soon I'd miss him, didn't you?"
A murmur swelled into a cacophony. Whispers sharpened into accusations, and accusations became a roar. The townsfolk leaned in as if the very walls demanded a verdict. Mothers clutched infants to their chests. Old men muttered prayers under trembling breaths. The preacher lifted his hands, but the crowd's fervour could not be stilled. I did not mean... Edith's words faltered, caught and shattered by the roar around her. Questions came fast, laced with venom. Who had seen her in the woods? Who had heard her speak to spirits? Every answer twisted back upon her, every glance and gesture interpreted as guilt. Her calm, measured responses only seemed to infuriate further. The innocence itself became an affront.
Joseph watched, heart hammering. He was certain she had caused Ezra's death, yet a sliver of doubt gnawed at him, small and insistent. The clear eyes, the trembling lips, the unbroken composure. Could she truly be the devil's instrument? He pushed the thought aside. There could be no mercy, not now, not while the town's souls hung in peril. The preacher's gavel fell like a hammer. Edith Sinclair's fate would be decided not by reason nor by proof, but by the mounting weight of fear, grief, and imagination. And in that room, amid the flickering shadows and the stifling smoke, horror revealed itself not in the witchcraft she allegedly practiced, but in the certainty of a town convinced it had found evil, and the innocent woman caught in its relentless grasp. The sentence was death by fire, and the judgment would be executed swiftly that very night. A stake was driven deep into the softened earth, and she was bound to it with a chain wrought in Burroughs' own smithy. She pleaded for understanding, for mercy, for grace, invoking their Christian charity, appealing to reason, but reason had long fled. As the piles of dry, cracking wood were stacked about her, Joseph met her gaze. She was silent now, fully aware that protestation would avail nothing. The same softness and measured wisdom she had once shown, the words he had weaponized against her, endured even now. Burroughs lifted the torch and with an unceremonious flick cast it among the kindling. The flames licked at the wood, slow at first, then creeping toward her feet. She fixed her eyes on Nehemiah.
"You fool," she said, voice steady, trembling only with righteous fury. "You think to conceal your deeds beneath these flames? It is you who shall be consumed by your own deceit."
Her gaze turned to Joseph, the softness giving way to a piercing, uncompromising fury. "And you who have turned blind eyes to the suffering of your kin, had you sought to honor your son, you would have nurtured him, not spurned him."
Then raising her voice to the trembling heavens, she cried, I will become the spark that ignites this realm. Let my fire burn so bright that none may forget its radiance.
The flames rose hungrily, crackling and snapping as they licked at her ankles, then her legs. Yet Edith Sinclair did not scream in terror. Instead, her voice rose above the roar of fire, clear and commanding, weaving strange syllables, an otherworldly chant that vibrated in the bones of all who listened.
Her hair streamed like living fire, eyes glowing with a light that was no earthly lantern. Flesh and flame seemed to merge, the air around her shimmering with heat and wrath. Her figure elongated, twisted and twisted again, becoming something both beautiful and terrible, a visage of wild divinity like a vision glimpsed through smoke and shadow. "Samhain!" she cried, voice echoing through the night like a horn of warning. "Hear me! Hear the wrath of the old ways! Let the spirits rise and judge those who cling to false virtue. Let the wind of the harvest scourge your hearts and your homes."
The townsfolk stumbled back, clutching one another, eyes wide with terror. Mothers pressed children to their breasts. Fathers muttered prayers, but the words died on their lips. Smoke and spark swirled about her, as if the fire itself obeyed her summons.
"Cursed are you who would condemn the innocent. Hear the old gods, hear the forest, hear the river." Her hands lifted, fingers splayed, flames arching from her form like serpents of living fire. "May your crops wither, your wells run dry, and your hearts know the anguish of the lost."
Joseph stood frozen, heart hammering, awe and terror warring within him. The fire had become more than wood and kindling. It had become a conduit. Edith's voice rang with authority no mortal could resist, her image shifting, twisting, impossibly tall and terrible in the torchlight. He knew then that the woman they had condemned was no ordinary healer, no mere apothecary. She was something older, something primal. The crowd fell to its knees, some weeping, some muttering confessions, all bound by the terror of what they had unleashed. And above them, in the heart of the inferno, Edith Sinclair's voice carried like thunder, a dirge, a summons, a curse, a promise that the reckoning had only just begun. The wind rose, carrying sparks and ash, like a storm of fire across the town. The townsfolk ran in blind panic, but the fire leapt as if guided by unseen hands, creeping over thatched roofs, into barns, onto dry leaves that had fallen from the surrounding trees. Smoke clawed at their throats, stinging eyes and lungs, but no one could stop it. Their prayers dissolved into the crackle and roar, swallowed by a power older than any they knew. Joseph stumbled, heart hammering. He had thought to witness judgment, to see justice done, yet here he stood, amidst the wreckage of his own certainty. Edith's figure shimmered and twisted in the flames, no longer human, now something elemental, a goddess of wrath and flame, her hair a cascade of fire, eyes twin embers burning into every soul.
"None shall survive the deceit," she cried. "Every man, every woman, every child, let the harvest moon bear witness to your undoing."
The earth trembled beneath their feet. Roofs collapsed, walls splintered, and the river at the edge of the town rose in black, churning waves that swallowed livestock, wagons, and those who had sought to flee. Flames climbed higher, roaring into the sky like a crown of fire, mirrored in the horror-struck eyes of the people. Joseph fell to his knees, coughing, ash coating his face. The cries of neighbours, friends and children mingled with the crackle and roar, a symphony of terror. Yet above it all rose her voice, a litany of judgment, unyielding and eternal. You have wronged the innocent. You have scorned the truth. Now witness the price of your blindness. The church, the hearths, the smithy, every building of the settlement all became tinder. Flame licked the timbered streets, turning them to rivers of fire. Smoke and ash choked the sky until even the moonlight seemed to dim. And in that inferno Edith Sinclair's image towered, a living conflagration calling the wrath of Samhain and the old powers down upon all who had dared to betray her innocence. By nightfall there remained nothing but embers, blackened stones, and the stench of charred wood and flesh. The settlement, once a speck of life in the wilderness, had been erased. And amidst the ruin the fire whispered, a voice carried on the wind, promising that the reckoning had not ended, only begun.